Welcome to the NABS podcast. NABS is the support organisation for those working in advertising, marketing and media. I'm your host, Louise Scody. Each week I'll be chatting with someone from our industry to find out how they support themselves and those around them through challenging times as well as the day-to-day. And it's all to help you support your own mental wellness. I can't wait to start chatting. Chris Hayward is one of the most senior names in advertising. Currently working as an independent consultant at St. Domingo Consultancy, he was previously a legendary name at Zenith, where he ended up as its head of investment. Chris is known for his first-class networking skills and positive demeanour, but he's also been through a serious mental health journey, which began after a freak accident sent him into a downward spiral. This ended up with him having to be rescued by the police before receiving psychiatric help. Chris is passionate about talking about mental health and the benefits of doing so. Now, you might have seen our NABS talk with Chris a few years ago. We'll post a link to that in the show notes. It's a must-watch. It's a deep dive into what Chris went through and how he came back from the brink. That's where you can learn in detail about Chris's experience. Today, we're going to focus on how Chris is doing now and his advice for supporting your mental wellness. Welcome, Chris. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Louise. And yourself?
I'm very good, thank you. And I know that you're a big believer in the power of asking that question, how are you? And really, really meaning it, which is something I know that we'll come on to in our conversation. Let's crack on with the first thing to think about, mental wellness. What does mental wellness look like to you?
Mental wellness to me at the moment is a question of me keeping as healthy as I can, both physically and mentally. And part of my regime, because of the accident, we won't talk about that much, is that I try to maintain a good physical level of wellness. I also try to make sure that I engage with people. I'm not becoming isolated, and generally, I'm trying to keep things in a balance. That's what it looks like to me. So I am, healthy both mentally and physically, because I do think that both those things are intertwined. And I have a good level of contact with people. I'm sure we'll touch about on this later, but one of the things of COVID is unconsciously we've all become a little bit more isolated than we perhaps previously were. So it's all about keeping things in a balance and trying not to let things get out of step, out of phase.
That notion of keeping in touch with people is really important. At NABS, we talk a lot about the power of community. So how do you go about making sure you're keeping in contact with people? Is that regular phone calls? Do you arrange meetups? How do you like to do it?
Well, you see, as I've just alluded to, I'm very keen on maintaining mental and physical wellness. So, I go cycling several times a week. I go old man running a couple of times, and I also do some uh, supervised sessions with a trainer, specifically because of my knee injuries. That's one of the ways in which I do it. I'm also, quite heavily involved with people who like football. I have other groups as well that I try to keep in contact with regularly. I think that one of the things that has emanated from lockdown is that somehow unconsciously we've stayed inside our houses. So one of the things I'm trying to do now is go out and see people face to face. I think that's really important. Zoom and Teams definitely had a purpose during the thing, but I don't think anything can replace seeing people face to face, or having a proper chat, even if it's by the phone. Texting doesn't do it for me. So some form of oral communication, verbal communication, I think is really important in order to kind of maintain that balance that I've just talked about.
Yeah, it's a common thread coming through with all the conversations we're having with people at the moment. Now, you are an absolute mental health champion. You really do extol the benefits of talking about mental health, and you've been searingly open about your own journey. We've done work with you before. People can read your collaborations with us in Campaign and other trade titles over the past few years, where you've talked about your experience. But despite you and some other people as well in the industry talking about their experience of mental health challenges, there's still a really big taboo around the subject. So, how have you found the ability and the strength to talk about your mental health so openly? And what's your advice for other people who might want to talk, but because of the stigma or anything else, they feel as though they just can't do it?
Um, it is it's a really important question. From my own point of view, I've never had a problem with it, and I will keep emphasizing from my point of view, because my mental condition is just as much part of me as the fact that I don't have any tendons in my knees. That's really part of me. And I think because of my previous work, my podcast and stuff, the people are aware of my openness, and I've actually been quite surprised in a positive way that people want to engage me, and talk about their friend obviously being about
Yeah,
themselves. Um,
quote unquote
yeah, yeah,
friend.
yeah, and I think it's quite I think the taboo thing, it does exist, but I think once the taboo is broken, the people are much more open than you'd ever believe. My experience has been that nobody's ever looked at me askance or anything like that. They might, I don't know, I'm not aware that they then have a lesser regard for me because of my mental condition. But I think the important thing is to start that engagement. I've really found out that I've never ceased to be surprised that I've had 10-minute conversations with people that I would never expected to have had. And I think that that's a good thing, because one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast is because I hope that people, because of my frankness and because of the fact that I've had personal experience, will resonate with some of the things that I'm saying. But that first step is definitely to talk. I think that can be easier said than done, but you're going to ask, I assume, about what people can do to help in that. I am in a
That
very
is what I'm going to ask.
so sorry. I'm in the very fortunate position that I've now went through cognitive behavior therapy. I can deal with the symptoms when I'm heading towards, a moment of depression, whereas other people may not be able to recognize it. What people can do is, and going back, and it's interesting, Louise, in this Mental Health Awareness Week, I've watched a few pieces on BBC programs about, mental health and stuff. And the one thing that really comes through, there was two things. It's talk and support. So, it's easier said than done, I know, but to talk to somebody, um, if you are struggling, and if I, talk about some of the symptoms, and people recognize it, you've got NABS has got a helpline. There are other
Yeah,
helplines out there. You know, um, you know, I've always talked about the fact of, that what I call the waterfall of depression, of negativity. I start off with little things, and over the course of a few days, in my case, I'm then responsible for every catastrophe in the world, and I've
yeah.
an overwhelming sense of me being useless. So I recognize that, and my family now are very good in terms of the support. My wife quite often says, "Have you been out for fresh air?" Which kind of is her way of saying, you're a bit down in the dumps recently. I also get very tired, so I can recognise those things. But from people's own point of view, I think it can be difficult for them to recognise that developing in themselves. However, if we go to some advice that I would give, if you make that phone call to somebody you think that maybe is being isolated, um, make the phone call. Uh, I'm not going to give advice to do things that are really complicated. Do simple things. Make the phone call. Arrange for a cup of coffee. If you know that that person about whom you have some concerns, they're like walking or they're like going for a bike ride, I don't know, or like going to the cinema, suggest some joint venture there, And I think to introduce the notion of you feeling sound mentally, it is difficult because that's not a natural progression of a conversation. How have you been? How's your mental state? But what you can say is, things along the line of, all right, if you know that like on the cinema, what was the last film that you saw? "Oh, I haven't seen anything for 3 months." If they've gone into that period of isolation, you can ask certain questions which will give a sense of how they're communicating with people. And so I just think that maybe uh, by asking those type of questions and making some analysis, you can judge the degree of involvement that is necessary, really. But I do simple things. How are you? How long has it been since? Would you like to come out with me? They're not they're not difficult things to try and put into practice.
So there's some really simple ways that you can initiate the conversation if you feel that someone around you
Yeah.
may be struggling with their mental health, and equally if you want to start talking about your own mental health, but you don't have someone around or you're worried about their reaction, then an independent helpline, calling NABS, for example, or one of the other organizations out there might be helpful as well. So if we've got managers specifically listening to this, how can they support the mental wellness of their teams? We know that that's one of the biggest concerns for managers now since the pandemic, that teams want more and more emotional support from their managers, and not everybody feels understandably equipped to deal with that responsibility and isn't sure what to do. Again, for you, is that as simple as just checking in with your team members for a cup of coffee and having a conversation, or if there's some other techniques that you think should come into play here?
Well, I actually think that everything comes down to talk and support at the end of the day. But with the reference to managers, obviously there's a greater these days need for a sense of a greater responsibility other than that just purely of a professional one. And I'm going to lose it. It's not a myth now. Alex George is the doctor who was on Love Island, and I've just been
Yeah.
reading some stuff by him, and then he quotes that there's no doubt that lockdown played its part in in increased evidence of depression. In 2022 study by Exeter and Nottingham University's mental health and well-being in young people in the UK during lockdown, the authors conclude the evidence suggests that lockdown has caused a well-being crisis in young people. So, you know, that is there. And therefore, obviously there's a responsibility. But I don't, we're not psychologists. I don't expect managers to be psychologists. But what they can do is that they can kind of own a relationship with, let's say, half a dozen people. I mean, I'm not expecting a CEO to then have an involvement with 60, 100, 200 people. That's just not going to happen. But what they can do is the following, they can make sure that they do have a proper conversation with that group of six, or it doesn't have to be six, it can be three or whatever. And they have a proper conversation. Now again, it doesn't have to be something as blunt. Are you feeling mentally balanced? It doesn't have to be like that. But when people say, how was your weekend, and then they say, oh, did you get that presentation written? well, kind of, they're not really interested in how your weekend was. But if you're going to inquire about people, make sure you do it in such a way that it manifests a genuine interest. So, what did you do during the week? Did you go out? Did you take part? Hopefully you know them well enough to know that they do like cinema, or they do like going out cycling, or whatever. You can have a conversation that specifically relates to them, and they feel involved, and do properly ask the question. Um, Now you can then say to that team of six people or whatever, make sure that permeates down, and then they are taking a proper responsibility. There was a couple of other things I did see as well, related to the BBC coverage of this topic, and I thought, because I knew this was coming up, is there anything there that I could take and spread it wider? Now, obviously, particularly during this week, the bigger firms will be having, mental illness, mental health, wellness days, and all that kind of stuff. Whilst I think that's really good and that concentrates, and you'll have speakers from this, that, and the other, the problem is that mental health is 365 days a year. It's not just
Yeah.
one day a year. So, I don't think people do it in any malicious way, but, oh, we covered mental health because we had a day's conference for it or whatever. I saw something last night which I thought was quite surprisingly really good. So the construction workers apparently really suffer from the sense of isolation, which is quite surprising. Construction has also been, quite a male industry. But one of the suppliers to the construction workers, they actually put on, it was based in Woking, funnily enough, basically put on kind of a casual day at which people could attend, with the overall, as they talk to people about how you're feeling and all this type of stuff, but moreover the sense of a coffee in a relaxed way. They did have information about what you call it, information lines and helplines and all that kind of stuff, but it didn't have the formality of a preset day. And also, it looked to me as if it was something that took place more than once a year. And I thought, well, from an unexpected source, I actually think that was quite a brilliant idea. Something quite soft, but actually quite hard, because people know that specifically the idea of the day there is to talk about how they're feeling generally mentally. So that taboo in a way, if you're within the grounds there and having a coffee in that setting, you've already accepted that that's going to be a subject that you're going to talk about, but in a much softer way. And as I say, it kind of felt to me that it's something that would continue much more than a specific day dedicated to it.
I mean, it is an ongoing process, the support of your own mental wellness and that of those of people around you. You're absolutely right. So, how do you keep yourself on track day to day? Let's say it's a day where you haven't got a cycle ride planned, or you're not going to see your football mates. What is the thing that you might do on that kind of day just to make sure you're okay, to check in with yourself and to top yourself up if you need to?
What I find is it's something that grows over a few days, and I've got a good support team around me. My wife is particularly acute to when I'm not quite, in a happy mode. But what I do is, let's say, every 3 days or so. I mean, it's not a fixed thing. How long is it since you read a chapter of a book? How long is it since you listened to some of your favorite music? How long do you feel like doing any exercise? And usually, if I'm in a negative phase, then it will be, no, I don't. I'm too tired. And what I then try to do is kind of ease myself away from that, saying, okay, you know. give yourself a day or two off. But on the third day, I'm going to make a phone call. I'm real believer in going back to basics, Louise. I'm going to I'm going to go and do 15 minutes of exercise, and the next time it'll be 15 minutes of exercise. Plus, I'm going to listen to three of my favorite songs while I'm doing that exercise. I think that if you do come to an awareness of the fact that you're not on top form, I think one of the things you need to, well, my experience is you need to be kind to yourself whilst recognizing that it's time to reach out. You need to speak to somebody or whatever. Don't be doing you're useless, you're worthless, and all that kind of stuff, because I can assure you, Louise, that in the waterfall of negativity that goes from, oh god, the weather's rubbish today, to I am completely useless. So it's learning to manage stuff like that, and I think really important, if you are in a position where you recognize that, you are in a low moment, and you are talking to people, well, certainly that be my first piece of advice. Speak to someone, because I think, you will find people much more receptive than ever you thought you would be. But, there are things I've developed for myself, which, bring yourself out, because that whole thing towards it being useless and all that kind of stuff, that is part of the process of isolating yourself, but not doing it deliberately, but unconsciously.
Yeah, and there's something in there about treating what might seem like a small win, like going for a 15-minute walk instead of your regular 1-hour cardio session. Actually, that's a really
Yeah,
big
yeah,
win, because if you're not in a great space and you've managed a 15-minute walk around the block, then you've done something amazing for yourself. So being able to celebrate that in any way, even if you're not feeling particularly
yeah,
celebratory that day, and there's more power in that than getting into the negative
yeah.
waterfall that you are so accurately describing there. What do you think is one thing that we could all do to support our mental wellness this week? I have a feeling it's going to be something around meeting up with a mate.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't change all the general wisdom that's around, mental wellness, but it is. I mean, the way, so what am I going to do? So I know that I've targeted a person to contact that I know um, has not had a happy time recently, and for one reason or another. But rather than say I'm going to do it, I will do it. I'm gonna actually make sure the contact is reinvigorated, and we set up a session. Go out for a drink or whatever. But now that would be something which I think is really important, because unfortunately, I'm aware of people going through difficult times.
And so many people are at the moment as well. And, with the cost of living crisis and all of the financial worries, meeting up with a mate doesn't have to be an expensive thing, does it? You could just go for a walk if you don't want to shell out for dinner or a couple of drinks.
Again, Louise, probably the only political statement I'll make today is I find the cost of rail travel a real problem in the country. And it'll be one of those things which maybe inhibit people from going back to work 5 days a week if they want to, for that more regular contact. And so I think that going back to coming up with very easy, very doable solutions is something that we should give more thought to. It doesn't sound much going for a walk or meeting up or going for a coffee. It doesn't have to be elaborate. I would just advise people to keep it as simple as possible, in order that whatever they think about doing, they can actually put into practice. If you give yourself a list of 6 things to do and 5 of them are really difficult, I will suggest even the easy one won't get done, because it's just all too difficult. I'm a great believer in basics.
Now, you are someone who very much did reach crisis point. And again, you must watch my interview with Chris on our NABS YouTube video, where you'll get a really deep dive into Chris's journey to really the tip of a mental health challenge and back again. So having been there, having been at peak crisis, what's a really big piece of advice you could give to help people before they get to a crisis point?
It'd probably be two things. I'm doing this, so whatever I say, and if there are people having difficult moments, it resonates. If anything like that, if anything of what we said today is resonating, then I think that whoever's listening, whoever that listener is, um, needs to talk to somebody in the first place, and be that through the helpline, um, or talking, as I say, talking to a group support. However, I do feel if there is that recognition, and maybe it is really deep, I think then you've got to go to qualified advice, because some of this is not just cheat. A lot of it is treatable by talking and being open about it, but sometimes, therapy or medication or whatever that may be needed. And I do think that at some stage, connecting with a doctor, um, that is really important. Certainly, it was, massively important in helping me deal with my condition. Then I would say, from the other point of view, if you do have friends and you will start have I seen so and so for the last 3 months? It may not be necessarily ringing them directly or contacting them, be ringing a mutual friend and saying, have you seen this person recently? If you have, how have they been? If you haven't, I'm going to try and make a contact with them. But kind of one of the good things about the awareness of mental health, the increasing discussion, is that people now are much more aware of symptoms, or the first signs of depression, or people not being very happy. People are much more aware of those first signs out. That withdrawal, that voluntary isolation, that lack of, well, basically doing anything. You can see people going out, with lethargy, lacking that spot. The first thing you can do is contact them, is actually do something about it. As I say, it's up to yourself as to how you do it, be a phone call, but try and get in front of them, try and meet up with them, try and have a look at them, try and put yourself in a position where you can see if they're a bit low at the moment, or if there's a genuine concern. There's a because that's one of the things. It's quite natural not to be very happy when it's pouring down, you can't go out, but then it goes on to the next level of, well, that's a constant state, and it can get deeper and deeper. As I say, the drop of negativity can become the waterfall of negativity, without that person directly involved being really aware of it. So there's responsibility, on both sides. But I do think if people recognise any of the things that we've been talking about, here, Louise, and they see it in people they know, then please contact them. And if people are feeling in any way or recognise any of the signs and symptoms, then I'd suggest that certainly, please talk to somebody close. But if they feel they can't do that, get on to the NABS helpline and talk to somebody, because I do think that once you start talking, it becomes less and less of a problem.
You just need to break that initial barrier, don't you? So it's coming on to the last question now. And again, I have a strong feeling that I know what you're going to say here. What's the lesson you've learned about how to support yourself? And is it that power of conversation to stop that teardrop becoming a waterfall?
It is, because I've had experience of it, so I can't cure it, but I can recognise the first signs of when I'm going into about depression. And I now have people with whom I can talk, and they are surprising. But the first point is tell somebody, talk to somebody, and start the first steps, on learning how to cope with it. I mean, I'm not cure is not the right word here, but managing these conditions is, something that is very much possible, and I think, that's really important. But as you say, talk and support, that's the first thing. And then if I can go back to this Alex George, it was really interesting. I thought this, it's really nice. So he's published books and he's become a bit of a voice for the whole thing of mental health. And, he said, I've had random guys come up to me in the pub and just hand me a pint of beer saying, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. Then they go back to the group of lads chatting away and probably their friends have no idea.
Wow.
So that actually was quite a powerful thing I read this morning, and I was very determined to include it in this. Just don't keep it to yourself. I think I genuinely believe that, the taboo exists, but a lot of it is self-created, if you know what I mean. So
Yeah.
I can't possibly talk to anybody about it, but if you do talk to people about it, I think that, you know, I've never had a rejection from people. "Oh, I don't want to talk about that." Maybe I've been lucky, but I think that people are much more empathetic than you would ever imagine.
I think they are. And certainly there's been more and more space in the national conversation around mental health and mental wellness. So we're more, hopefully, more of us are more in tune with the subject. And you certainly are 100% in tune with the subject. What's really come through in today's conversation is the power of talking and the power of just breaking the ice on that conversation. And if you don't have someone, a close friend or relative that you feel comfortable speaking with, then find a support organization. If you work in advertising, marketing, and media, then give NABS a call. That is what we are here for. And we will just listen. No judgment. We will just listen. And if you happen to be listening to this and you're not from the industry, then there are a host of other organizations that can help you and do the same thing as well. So there are definitely people out there. And anyone that has Chris in their lives, give Chris a call as well, because he would love to connect with you and to listen to what you have to say. Chris, it's been, as ever, an absolute pleasure speaking with you, and just so great to know that you're still keeping yourself topped up and you're still being quite the ambassador for mental wellness. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Louise, and thanks for the opportunity to do this podcast. And I hope that it does resonate with somebody out there, and with whomever it resonates, please give a helpline a call or contact a friend. Do start a conversation.
Thank you, Chris.